Meeting to order, and this is the March 4th meeting. We'll note that all commissioners are present, and the first item of business is the order of business. And I know under the commission we'd add point number 2, which would be consideration of the employment contract for the city attorney. Also, under reports where it says none, I think the city administrator is going to comment on the email that came to you today regarding engineering projects. There were several engineering projects. They're called task orders, and this would be under what I would assume is a master task order agreement. We're not going to take action on those things tonight because they're very significant, but I think there'll be some comments about them, and then this would likely be on the agenda for the second meeting in March. Is that what you're thinking, Mr. Kessel?
It certainly is, President Johnson.
Okay. Are there any other additions or changes to the order of business? So with those two additions that I mentioned, would there be a motion then to approve the order of business?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries. Then we move to the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to discuss?
Mr. President, I'll move we approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So the motion carries. We're now going to move to tab number 4. We'll be doing item A, which is the MDU and Rough Rider Service Area Agreements. Again, I have to abstain there, so I'm actually going to turn the gavel over to Commissioner Jackson, and he will lead those two items. Mr. Jackson.
Okay, again, we have two service area agreements, one with MDU, one with Rough Rider. Take them one at a time, and this is the second reading for both of them, ordinances 1497 and 1498 respectively. Mr. Colling, do we have any changes looking at the MDU agreement, which would be 1497? Any changes in the ordinance since we last looked at it?
Vice President Jackson, Commissioners, there are no changes to the ordinances as such. However, I did have some conversation with a representative from one of the entities and wanted to make some clarifications on information that was provided to you last meeting. If you recall, last meeting you approved the service area agreement, which set forth the various service areas that MDU and Rough Rider would service within the city of Dickinson. And I made mention to you at that time that the agreement was subject to the approval of the City Commission as well as of the Public Service Commission. I believe I mentioned to you last time that the agreement had already been approved by the Public Service Commission. Turns out that is incorrect. It has not been approved yet by the PSC. The normal approval process that the entities follow, as I gather, is to have the city, the affected city, approve that agreement and then present it to the Public Service Commission once that approval is completed by the city. So we anticipate that agreement will go before the PSC before too long. And we don't anticipate any problems with the PSC approving it if the City Commission is on board as well. Also, in both of these ordinances, it makes reference to the fact that the rates charged by each entity are subject to local ordinances or federal or state regulations. I'm informed that at least as far as Rough Rider Electric goes, there are no local or city or federal or state ordinances that do govern the rates charged by an electric cooperative. So I wanted to make those brief clarifications. It doesn't change any of the language for these franchise ordinances, but for your information, I wanted to bring that to your attention. Mr. Jackson.
Okay, appreciate those clarifications. Again, let's talk about the MDU agreement. Any commissioners have any comments or questions on that ordinance?
I'll make a motion to approve second reading, final passage of ordinance 1497.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? There's no discussion. We'll vote. Mrs. Dukart.
Aye.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Mr. Altman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and the record should show that our president abstains. That motion carries. We'll go ahead and do the Rough Rider agreement as well. Any questions, comments there? If not, do we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve second reading, final passage, ordinance 1498.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Not, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. That motion carries also. Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. We'll move on then to item B, which is ordinance for vacation accruals. This would be consideration to approve the second reading and final passage of ordinance 1499. Mr. Colling, is there anything you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Mr. President, Commissioners, as you'll recall, this ordinance grants some additional discretion to the city administrator and with your concurrence to the Board of City Commissioners to grant some additional vacation time to certain executive level employees upon hire. There are no changes to the ordinance from first reading.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Colling. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this proposed ordinance? If you would like to comment, you may step to the podium now, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anyone wish to comment? There's no one from the public that cares to comment. Any comments by city commissioners or city staff?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
move to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1499.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. That brings us to item C. And again, this is a first reading of an ordinance. Number what, Mr. Colling?
Mr. President, this will be ordinance 1500-1500.
1500. Okay, so we have ordinance number 1500. It is the ordinance regarding the Dickinson 2035 Comprehensive Plan. Mr. Catan, would you like to introduce this item?
Mr. President, for the public that will be seeing, if they didn't see the prior one, we had a public hearing prior to this meeting. We went over the changes from the draft comprehensive plan that was presented by KLJ. This is a ordinance to adopt the final version of the comprehensive plan with all the changes that were made from public comments, either from elected officials, city staff, and other state and federal agencies that contributed to that. City staff would recommend approval of that, and I'm available if you have any questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Catan. Mr. Colling, anything you would like to add by way of introduction?
No, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. Kessel?
No either.
Okay. All right. Certainly, if anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this proposed ordinance, they may do so now. Come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public that wishes to comment. It's my understanding, Mr. Catan, from our previous meeting that there will be a little bit of time between first reading and second reading. We'll get a chance to see another draft of the comprehensive plan. Is that correct with the various changes that are to be made?
Yes, Mr. President. You know, we could make that window, but based upon some of the changes you have, what I'll direct KLJ is to make those comments similar to what gave to you a revision packet. It should only be a couple of pages. My recommendation would be that we would forward that to you, get the consensus from the commissioner comfortable with it, and then we'll schedule it for the second reading if that's the wishes of the commission.
When would we see all these changes into, you know, the plan itself? I mean,
we could have that for the final version. That was my idea. I provided the summary for you just as a way that you, for brevity purposes, instead of you having to go through the entire document and figuring out exactly where they were at. I just wanted to provide to you the changes from the draft, which was this big instead of this big. The draft changes to that, so it's for brevity and for clarity for you. If you prefer, before the second reading, we could have all copies of the final comprehensive plan plus the changes that we made from this meeting for you to read and to feel comfortable with. So there's no rush on this. I could have that for you. It was just to save paper and I know you're very busy, and I just wanted to highlight just the changes instead of having an entire document in order to look through, in order to find them.
I guess I'm okay with doing it that way. I just
Ultimately, when it's after the second reading, all those changes would be from the first to second reading. We'll have our final version that will be adopted, and then all the commissioners, you'll have your own copy, city staff members, planning commissioners, and then we'll have that available for the public, and we'll figure out a cost for that as well. It will be also downloadable from our website. So you will have your personal copy when all said and done, ultimately. But if you want it prior to the meeting, I have no problem. We could provide those copies for you, Mr. President.
no, I'm fine with the way you've outlined it. How about the rest of you, though?
I'm okay with the summary form.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see just the revisions. I certainly want a copy of the finished product, you know, when it's done.
Okay, any other comments?
Mr. President, I'm going to make the same comment that I did at the special meeting immediately prior to this meeting, although I understand the special meeting will be televised, but there will be some people who don't see both meetings on television, and maybe specifically to the public, to the residents of Dickinson, that, you know, this comprehensive plan has been a year and a half in the works. It was significant dollars from the city, although most of the dollars did come from the DOT, but still significant dollars from the city. And most people haven't had a chance to see it. It's a tremendous document. It's going to really give us great basis for our decisions moving forward as our community continues to grow. It's going to be a really good tool for us. However, the entire plan had to start with a prediction, if you will, of population, which we had NDSU do. That prediction of population essentially came out to 42,000 people. So we completed the comprehensive plan based on that 42,000. We know what we have to do should we end up with 42,000 people in Dickinson. We know what we have to build. We think we know about how far we'll grow and many other things like that. But I think the point that needs to be made now as we continue moving forward is that as we continue to make these decisions, we can't accept that 42,000 as gospel, if you will. We have to decide for ourselves what we really think our community will someday be and make our decisions in that regard. And the community may not be as large as 42,000. Some think will be larger than 42,000. But again, the point is that as we make decisions about subdivisions and about the infrastructure that we put in the ground, that we have to make decisions on that population each time we vote on one of these items. We have to continually second guess that. So I just want to put that concept out there so that everybody knows that that is certainly something we'll have to continue to monitor.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Altman, you also made, I think, some good comments in that joint meeting. Would you care to kind of reiterate those too?
Sure. I think this is a historic move by the commission. It's what sets us apart from other communities in the oil hub. It means that we have taken the time to map out where we're at today, where we want to be in 2035. It gives our city staff some real plans that they can refer to when they are meeting with developers and when they're looking at growth in our community. It gives us something to reference back to. Also, because it's a 2035 plan, it also gives future commissions some flexibility, because this cannot possibly cover all of our bases and get us to the end point. There will be a lot of different changes in the plan moving forward, and I think that we made an important step today in allowing that flexibility moving forward. I think we'll look back at this, and this will also be our plan that helps us make our case and plead our case to the legislature as we're looking for the funding that's going to be needed as our community grows. This gives us a document that we can refer to. We're not, as a commission, shooting from the hip and hoping that it all works out. We've put a lot of thought into how much of the growth can we take on, how fiscally, financially, and just as a community, how much of this growth can we handle and still keep Dickinson the community that people want to live in and thrive in. And so I think we will look back at the passage of this comprehensive plan as an important step in the growth of the city of Dickinson. I'm very proud of it.
Well, I think we all are, Commissioner Altman, so that's well said by both Commissioner Jackson and Commissioner Altman. I think what we have here is certainly, it's not a perfect document, but I think it's an excellent document, and I think that says well of our city staff and the consulting engineers that we retained to help us put this document together. So we have an excellent plan, and all that remains now is to execute it, and I think we have the talent at our city staff that we can execute this this document, and I'm confident that if we do execute it well, that in a sense it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that the city will attain the populations levels that NDSU has projected. Because I think if we do, again, do a good job of executing this, Dickinson is going to be the type of community that Commissioner Altman was referring to. And so I just want to say good job to all those who participated here. It's a great document. So with that, well, we have the motion. I think we have the motion, don't we? Don't we?
No, we don't.
Oh, well, who is there someone here that would like to make the motion to approve the first reading?
I would be very proud to approve the first reading, or make the motion for approval of first reading of ordinance 1500.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Altman. Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote then. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckart?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. I think we can squeeze in your reports, Mr. Kessel, before we go to the timetables.
Thank you, President Johnson. Commission, I do have a couple things I want to update the Commission on, in addition to the Master Task Order Agreement that President Johnson did reference earlier. The first is just an update. I spoke to Mr. William or Bill Watson, our new city engineer. He is in transit. He's stuck in a weather formation in Wyoming, but his start date will be March 11th, so 1 week from today. and hopefully we'll introduce him then to the commission and to the community the following week at the city commission meeting. Also, at a previous city commission meeting, the question was asked about the wastewater reclamation facility and if we've received any grant dollars, applied for them and received them back yet. We did receive our first initial payment of $5 million from that grant. So that has been receipted. It is in our coffers. The next item is the Heritage Hills Senior Housing Project that Mr. Madler from Beyond Shelter has presented. Were awarded federal tax credits. So that is the first major step of that project actually coming to fruition. So it appears that it is on its way. I'll remind the commission that we did award a pilot to that project. So we'll remind, as we go forward, we'll probably remind you again of the details of that pilot. And then the last item that I wanted to talk about just briefly, I've handed out some documents for your review. They're kind of substantial, so I don't want to have you go through them specifically at this time, but I do want to mention that the urban roads funding has been altered based upon federal law and MAP 21, or Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. They're calling it MAP 21. This bill is provided much less funding than originally anticipated. 45% of what the DOT was anticipating for funding is what they received. So it meant that we had to scramble, the state had to scramble in order to fund projects. These are the dollars that we're funding the extension of 10th Avenue West. We were intending to use for states as we extend that to the north. We traditionally, or were slated to receive about $1.7 million in fiscal year 2012 at the end of the year, so available for this year. Through some negotiations and some options, the original option had us actually in a deficit position with regards to urban roads funding to the tune of about $500,000. Now, if you look at the page that I did hand out, we are likely to endorse option 3, and that is the one referenced in the letter from the DOT. So we're back to about $1.1 million for funds available for projects moving forward. So these are important. We're certainly not where we were at the 1.7, but we're in a much better position than we originally anticipated, which was the option 1 scenario that I've handed out for you. So with that, the other item is the Master Task Order Agreement. We have 2 of these. We'd like to put them on the City Commission agenda for the next Commission meeting. One is from Apex and one is from KLJ. Both of those engineering firms have been assisting us with a great many of our engineering duties, KLJ specifically with the comprehensive plan and a lot of projects that have been born from that plan. Apex has been focused more on the wastewater side. They are currently designing, of course, our wastewater treatment plant. The Master Task Order Agreement outlines some basic and principles by which we then, once approved, we can then approve each task that comes underneath there, or task order, as it would apply. So in other words, we approve a master contract essentially that outlines some basic principles, and then they simply come back to us with each individual project. So for instance, we're looking at doing a wastewater pipe that will connect our wastewater treatment facility to the northwest side of our community. Once the Master Task Order Agreement is completed, then they'd simply come back for that pipe. They may come back for a lift station somewhere else. So it makes the task orders much easier because the basic parameters have been set by the Commission already and therefore negotiated. We've had these in line. They have a lot of scoping of projects going on by these 2 companies, and I don't blame them, but they would like to see us have formal approval so that they can formally move on and we can spend the dollars then to get these projects moving. We have a construction period this summer that we really need to take advantage of in order to facilitate all of the construction that the developers would like to see happen. And they can't do it without our infrastructure. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that the Commission may have about any of those subjects. so we can make our 5 o'clock timetable.
We can come back to Mr. Kessel and if we have questions for him regarding any of those items he mentioned or really anything else. So we do have this 5 o'clock item. It involves Heritage Hills, and Mr. Colling, I'm a little bit unclear here, but I do believe that this is here for a public hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President. This is a public hearing that is required to be held for the city's participation in a Mitabon project that is being run through the city of Devils Lake. The owner of the project has a couple of units in Dickinson, and because of the way the Mitabon project program is structured, requires a public hearing and a resolution of approval before the city commission in order to use funds from that Mitabon refinancing to be used for the projects in Dickinson. I believe the proponent of the project is in the audience and may be able to provide you with some additional information.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Colling. So this will be a public hearing. Maybe we'll ask that representative to start first, and then if anybody else from the public wishes to comment, we'll hear their comments. So is there a representative here? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Dennis Hilfer. I'm the Assistant Regional Manager for Metro Plains Management. And my boss could not make it out of Devil's Lake this morning, so I was informed about 2 o'clock that I had the honor and privilege of coming to meet with you. We are seeking approval of the multifamily housing revenue bond issue that was, I guess it was started in Devil's Lake, and it requires the approval of the cities of Dickinson and Beulah and Turtle Lake as well as Devil's Lake. So that's what my purpose in life is for today, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hilford. Are there any comments or questions for him?
The bond proceeds are just going to be used to refurbish the 95 units here in Dickinson?
That's correct.
Part of it?
Yep. We're going to be refurbishing with energy efficient boilers and water heaters and Energy Star appliances, siding, windows, cabinetry where necessary, and the money will be spent. Will stay right here in the community. It won't go outside the community. So we're and this is part of a 10 property project statewide that we're doing.
And so it won't be adding any new units, but it will be definitely increasing the efficiency
that's correct.
And the aesthetics of the current ones that we have.
That's correct. It will not change the footprint of the properties at all.
Okay.
Maybe for the public, could you summarize the financial obligation of the city with the MITA bonds?
Actually, all the financial obligations fall upon Metro Plains Management, or the MDI Limited Partnership, actually, and the city bears no financial responsibility in this whatsoever. The properties are being done under RD, and they're holding rural development. They're holding the mortgages, and the city has no financial responsibility here. We just need their approval.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hilford.
Sure.
Is there anybody else from the public that would like to comment regarding this item? If so, come to the podium now, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? There's no one from the public, so we'll declare the public hearing closed. Mr. Colling, is there a resolution number here?
Mr. President, this would be Resolution 11-2013.
Okay, so before you is Resolution 11-2013. Is there a motion regarding this resolution?
I'll second.
Mr. Steiner moves to approve, and Mr. Jackson seconds the motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson? Mr. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Olmans?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Okay. We'll go back to the reports by Mr. Kessel. He had completed his reports. Were there any questions or comments for him on any items? Do you have any thing that you'd like to say about legislative issues, bills?
Yeah, actually there is, President Johnson. Thank you for reminding me. There are two bills right now in the legislature that are working themselves through. They have made it to crossover. They originated in the House, are now going to be in the Senate, and they would limit the amount of property taxes that a city could levy based on a percentage. Right now that percentage is 3%. So in other words, you could not levy more than 3% of property taxes next year than you did this year. There are some caveats related to new growth and such, but it is a difficult bill in the environment in which we operate today. We have added several police officers, several fire department personnel. These are general fund expenses. We don't want the long-term residents of Dickinson to have to bear the brunt of growth from the oil development. We'd like to see new dwellers to our community bear that growth, and this may interrupt our ability to do that. So there's been several conference calls made. The North Dakota League of Cities is coordinating the effort to revise this property tax reform, as it's being called, but it does have some momentum. And certainly I understand people's concerns with regards to property taxes. I think this commission specifically has done a very nice job. We've outlined that in terms of trying to keep the mill rates down, trying to keep overall property taxes down. But there is some momentum regarding this particular bill.
The 3% is with respect to mills or dollars?
Growth, dollars. It would be total dollars, yeah. It's a, and sorry, I should have brought, and I'll provide you with the actual bill numbers and the language. I'll make sure I get that emailed out to you. The other one that I do want to mention is next Wednesday, March 13th, I believe it is, House Bill 1538, excuse me, the one that is going to be providing all of the dollars for Western North Dakota, Mr. Scarpel's bill, will be heard in committee. This is the bill that will be the vehicle by which we get funded. When I say we, I mean Western North Dakota, the communities, the political subdivisions and such. Very, very important bill for us. They have moved that bill to the Brinland-Haugland room, so you can tell by that move that they anticipate a lot of feedback and a lot of input. This is one that bill that we do support. However, we would like to see an amendment because it currently does not provide a provision to dedicate a percentage of the oil grant dollars to the oil hub cities, as is current law today. Currently, state law has a 35% carve-out in the oil impact grant program for the oil hub cities of Dickinson, Williston, and Minot. This bill, as in its current format, does not have that carve-out. It has the oil impact grant dollars. It just doesn't carve out oil hub cities. So we'd like to see that oil hub cities carve out, and possibly a distribution that would either be equal to all three cities or somehow provide for a mechanism so we know what our distribution would be if that carve-out does happen. So that's another very important bill that will be heard on Wednesday. They haven't assigned a time yet, but it will be held in Senate IBL in the Brinland-Haugland room on Wednesday the 13th. Those are the major ones that the Commission should be aware of at this time.
Well, Mr. Kessel and Commissioners, on that first bill you mentioned, limit of 3%, we've opposed those types of bills in previous sessions. I think we should oppose that again. even in a static situation where, say, your population really isn't growing, you're not adding much new construction, your general fund, which the property taxes go to, is largely driven by inflation. I mean, and the three most common inflationary items would be wage and salary increases, anything related to petroleum, which would have to do with asphalt, diesel fuel, and gasoline, which, you know, the city consumes a lot of those items, and health insurance. Now, I'm all for limiting to 3% if the state then can guarantee that health insurance premiums will only go up on average 3% a year or less, which they haven't been able to do so far. That we would see petroleum prices increase less than 3% a year, and wage and salaries would increase less than 3% a year. Even in the best of circumstances, it's hard to do that. And you're going to, since property taxes are funding things that are subject to inflation, it's hard to set a specific number for that. I think, again, every elected commission that has property tax authority tries to do their best to provide the services that the city or their respective taxpayers expect of them, and try to do it in a cost-effective manner. But to set a number like 3%, I think, is bad policy, and I think we should oppose that. And then if you mix in an environment where you have a rapidly expanding population like western North Dakota has faced, it's impossible. I mean, you have to take into account those environments. And we hold several public hearings on the budget every year, and many of us have been doing this for several years. I think I've sat through at least 13 budget hearings. Rarely does anybody really show up and comment on the budget. And I think it's probably happened in the past 13 years, but it's been a rare occurrence where a citizen asks for a copy of the budget, sits down with city financial staff or some of the commissioners and say, I have some questions or I have some suggestions on how to do this. It's done in a very public and open manner, and it's reported on several times during the year. I think they're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. And so I think our city, we should go on record as opposing this.
That would certainly be helpful for me as a lobbyist for the city, is to come back and say that our city commission has taken a formal position opposing this legislation. I'm trying to get you the exact number.
While you're looking there, if I'm understanding this right, what it means is that if we have a significant growth during the year, significant properties coming on the tax rolls, essentially those properties are going to be taxed at a lesser rate than existing properties, because we'll have to limit ourselves to that 3%.
No, I think they'll be taxed at the same rate.
They'll be taxed at the same rate as the other
But-
properties,
Yep.
but that rate will have to be less, because we'll be adding all those valuations.
Everybody's mill levy will go down.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. But those new properties, it really puts us at a disadvantage when we're growing fast.
Well, I think one of the things that gets overlooked, and I can't speak for other cities, but I mean, I've looked at our numbers in our city, and our general fund is, property tax only pays somewhere's around, I think it's 28 or 29% in the current year ran of our general fund expenses. That's, I mean, so property taxes aren't funding the entire general fund by any means. It's certainly less than a third, which means that we have to find nearly 70% of other monies to fund the general fund. And, you know, I could understand the legislature having some angst over this if, you know, if property taxes funded your entire general fund. It doesn't. It, in our case, it doesn't even fund 30% right now.
Both bill numbers are 1290 and 1465. The passed the House with 57 yeas and 31 nays. That was 1290. And 1465 passed with 63 yeas and 23 nays. So they're on the Senate side. They'll be scheduled for hearings. We have the opportunity to be heard yet. But as you can see, they passed with fairly significant majorities in the House.
And these are House bills?
Yes, both.
Yeah, so 1290 and 1465. I would encourage our commission to, you know, to go online and read those bills.
I will send them to you so you have them, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll send you the voting tally so you can see exactly who voted for which.
Well, if it's meaningful to you to have formal action by this board, I would certainly make that motion, that we oppose House Bill 1290.
I would, I guess, Commissioner Jackson, I mean, unless you've read the bills, I think we ought to read them before we formally oppose them. Just in case we're overlooking something here. But if it's, I mean, if they strictly limit to 3%, that's, I agree, they're not good bills, but.
And the one bill does exclusively do that. Its whole intention is to limit the 3%. The second bill, which I believe is 1465, that has more on the included with the bill itself. But I'll forward you the language of both. You can read them over.
It's, I suppose it's likely they're going to be heard before we meet.
That's entirely possible. I don't know that they've been scheduled, but it could be. I can tell you that the League of Cities is taking a stance opposing both of these bills.
Have they?
Yeah.
Well, I'd be open to a motion that would support the League of Cities position on these bills. That accomplishes the same thing.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Is there
I'll
a
second that one.
We have the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Okay, it's 5:20. We are going to hear a report on the homeless coalition, and I think Pastor Ron is here. We'll welcome him back to the podium and hear his report.
For the record, Pastor Ron Dizell, I'm the chair of the Dickinson Churches United for the Homeless, and of course this is our report after 1 month of operation. I have submitted, I assume you've received the front and back page report, so just for the sake of those who may be watching, and I'll tell you, I did not realize how many people watch. I get told all the time. Saw you on the commissioner, so that's a good sign for our city government that our city is interested. But just for the sake of that and for the sake of the record, I suppose, we have averaged just under 2 guests per night. You'll see that we started out pretty slim with the 1 guest per night, and then for a while we dropped off to 0 guests per night. And then in the last 2 weeks, we've averaged somewhere between 2 to 5 guests on a given night. And some of those are repeats, some are not. It has taken, by my count, a total of over 860 volunteer hours to operate the shelter. That's 4 volunteers awake and alert at all times. So far we've been able to do that just fine. I will tell you that we this is not sustainable over a 5-month period, which would be our goal next year, we will be needing to get more volunteers in order. We're going to start to get tired as they stay awake at night. And so we realize that we will be fine through this month of March, but that is an issue that we will be addressing in our off season. We've also had at least 120 hours of training. All of those volunteers have received training, and our training is available online on YouTube as well. So if somebody weren't able to be there, they would be able to receive the training that way. And then, of course, we haven't kept track of the number of hours of people who've been at meetings and planning and those kinds of things. So we're easily well over 1,000 hours of volunteer service, which, to tell you, I'm so proud of our city for the fact that these are volunteers who do it very gladly. And I haven't heard anybody complain or anything like that. They're very happy to be able to serve, and that speaks volumes. There is an adjustment I would make to when it says where our finances is at. That is our financial picture. We've received almost $6,000 in financial contributions. That does not include the blankets that have been donated from the hospital, but they had a partner in that, and that's missing from this report. The Knights of Columbus partnered with the hospital in order to provide those blankets for us. So I apologize for that error, but that's in there as well. I won't list the churches that have sheltered simply because we do actually keep that from the community. Not where they've sheltered, that's obvious by your temporary use permit, but where they will shelter next. And I think that's kind of a moot point. That's where we've already been, not where we're going. For the sake of the record as well, our board continues to meet every Thursday, and we review the program, where we've been that week and where we're going the following week. I'll tell you that the backbone of our organization right now, we found, has been our site coordinators. And the site coordinator is particularly within those partner churches that provide volunteers. We would call those a site, and each one of those has a coordinator who they are like our middle manager, that they do all the scheduling of our volunteers, and they work together with one another. For instance, just because one church is set to volunteer tonight doesn't mean that they may accept volunteers from another church to partner, as well as just people from the community. If we have people from the community that don't belong to one of those churches, we have assigned them to one of the site coordinators, not as a method of recruitment to the church, but more so as a method of management, and that seems to have gone really well. So our site coordinators have been just invaluable to us. One other thing that I'd like to just touch on from the lessons learned, one of the things that I would say, and this is my own personal observation, but the limits that we've placed on this particular sheltering project have been good. We recognize that the churches none of them were built with the mentality of a shelter. And so while it's worked extremely well, we have had no incidents in terms of what we would most likely, and I can't read your mind, but some of the concerns that were brought out during the conversation as far as behavior and things like that, none of those have come to fruition. But I think in large part because of the protections that we've placed. The homeless know, those who would become our guests, they are very acutely aware of what our expectations are in terms of behavior, in terms of substance use, and those kinds of things. So we haven't had any of those issues. I know that we've had, I know of at least one guest who has started with us, and then we didn't see him for a while, and then he came back, and the reason he volunteered to me was because of a substance issue. He got himself clean so he could get back in, and so those are the kinds of things we'd like to see. We also know there are some who just simply, for where they are at in life, they're not able to be that way. So this will not solve the problem in Dickinson, but it certainly helps to address the issue. We've partnered with the police department. They are the only organization that we've allowed to bring guests to us after hours. And the reason for that primarily is we don't have anybody on staff that can go and pick a guest up and bring them to the shelter. So the police department we have allowed, I think that they've done it a couple times where there may be somebody that they are working with and there's no place for them to sleep, and so then they would call the shelter and bring them directly to us, which I would hope has helped to solve part of problems that could exist that way too. As far as that celebration event, we are planning a celebration event. We had hoped in April, but as you know, in Dickinson, scheduling anything this short term, good luck. So it looks like we're going to be in May. It'll be a simple event, something like a barbecue. We do have a financial partner, and they did allow me to use the name, and that is the Meyer Realty Group is partnering to help sponsor that event. And so we're happy with that. We will be looking for some other sponsors. Not so much to sponsor that event, but to sponsor this program going forward. And so I'm hoping to be able to find some more corporate type sponsors that will come alongside. Particularly, we believe we're going to need a director next year. I've been doing that on my company dime, so to speak, and I won't be able to make it through next year doing it entirely that way. We're going to need a part-time director, and so we know that that will be necessary. So that just being said, the last two things that I'd like to mention, one other bonus that we had guessed it would be helpful, and I've seen it firsthand just last week, is that waiver. When our guests will fill out that paperwork, one of those forms, if you'll remember, was a form that allows it's a waiver to allow organizations in Dickinson to collaborate on a specific person's case. Until this time, each individual agency, because of privacy information issues, we weren't allowed to discuss with one another a specific person's case. And the example that I would use in general was we had an individual who required some assistance. I was able, as I visited with him on the phone, excuse me, to direct him to an agency where he was geographically closer to at that time. And then I was able to collaborate, because he had already been a guest, to collaborate with that agency in order to provide the care that he needed, which was very specific at that time. And so we could not have done that otherwise had that paperwork not been in place. So we've already seen that be a case where we're able to assist in a much greater way. I guess I would stand for questions on the report. I do have a request to make, and I don't know if this would be the time or if you'd want me to stand for questions. The request would be that because the number of guests that we've seen, we thought it would continue to rise. It has not. We do plan to we have their phone numbers. Believe it or not, we added that later to our paperwork, and every single one of our homeless guests has a cell phone or has had a cell phone. So we do plan to contact them at the end of this program and ask them as kind of a survey about their stay, how things could be improved by their measure and that, and that will help us make our plans going forward. But because we haven't seen the number of guests increase, we would like to request that we be allowed, we've held ourselves very strictly to the terms of our plan, because that's what you had seen, and we want to hold ourselves to that. What we would love the freedom to do is to be able to reduce the number of our monitors, our overnight monitors, to 3 rather than 4. We would still outnumber the guests some nights. Of course, if we were to get more than 10 guests, we would require the 4. I can tell you the site coordinators, as we spoke to them, they would still intend to schedule 4 every night. What this would do is if somebody got sick, or you see the weather out there tonight, it wouldn't put us at risk of disobeying our own plan. So we've held 4 every night, but we would like the freedom to be able to use 3.
Mr. Catan, I don't know if you'd remember right offhand, but do you as city staff, can you act on that request, or is that something that has to formally be acted on by the city commission?
I could act upon that. I would prefer your input in it. Based upon the numbers and talking with Pastor Ron, I have no objection to that, as long as we have that. Long as we have that point that if it's over 10 for a night, you do have that 4th one to be able to fill in. Other than that, I would have no objection to modifying it to allow 3. I think that you have plenty of staff in order to address the issues.
Do any of you commissioners want to give Mr. Catan some feedback or advice here on this item, or just let him handle it?
Staff accordingly. You need more, you add more.
Certainly.
I think the commission has full confidence in you dealing with this appropriately, so I think all you have to do is make your request to Mr. Curtin, and maybe you've already done that via attending the meeting tonight, but we'll just let him act on that. So, does anybody have comments or questions for Pastor Ron? Well, I think your entire organization, and you in particular, have just really done a great job here that speaks well of the people in our community. It's great to see the churches working together, and you certainly are part of the solution and not part of the problem, and I know I really appreciate what you've done here, and I think my fellow commissioners do too.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the good of the order, it should be said, too, that we are continuing to partner with the Homeless Coalition, which I know for much of the community, probably that gets skewed, which is which. And to be honest, a lot of times it's the same people sitting around the tables. But we do believe that we'll be able to further that entity as well. So for the good of the order, I think that should be mentioned, that organization is still alive and well and moving forward. So. Well, I thank you for your comments, Mr. President.
And again, we appreciate you coming back and giving us an update on the experience that you've had to date on this. Again, we thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we're to Community Development, tab 7, and Mr. Curtin, I believe that would be yours.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. Before I get started, I want to thank the Commission for your foresight and wisdom to move forward with the comprehensive plan. I know that had started prior to me coming here, and over the year and a half that we've been working on it, there's been a lot of work on everybody's end, and from the Commission to the Planning Commission and our volunteers, to staff members that are here in the dais in the back, and also ones that are not here tonight, and to the general public, for their contribution, because this is a community plan, and it is a vision from the community and not just from staff or from a select few. And I want to commend you on that, and thank you for recommending approval of that for the first reading. The first item that we have tonight is Oliver Commons. This is the final plat request for Oliver Commons, which is located southerly of 15th Street West and westerly of Elks Drive. The property is approximately 6 acres. This is a mixed-use development, and the Planning Commission and city staff recommend approval. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Curtin. You've heard his introduction. Are there questions or comments by commissioners? Is this Resolution 12?
That's correct, Mr. President.
There's no comments or questions. Is there a motion regarding Resolution 12-2013?
I'll move to approve the Oliver Commons plat, Resolution 12-2013.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Mr. Oltmans?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Mr. President, the next item is a final plat as well. This is a request for Whispering Pines subdivision, which is situated to the east of Highway 22 and north of 20th Street Southeast. The plat is essentially 2 lots. The purpose of this plat was to go through this process was in order for them to build a new residence on the property, and they had to subdivide the property. It meets our code for a major subdivision, but it's probably the smallest one that you will have for a major subdivision. The Planning Commission and city staff recommend approval. I'm available if you have any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Curtin. You've heard his introduction. Any comments or questions for Mr. Curtin? Mr. Colling, I assume it's 13? Okay. Is there a motion then regarding Resolution 13-2013?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Mr. Olmans?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Anything else, Mr. Catan?
No, Mr. President.
Okay. Brings us to tab 8, Public Works. And Mr. Zaroff?
President Johnson, Commission members, the report that is enclosed is the sanitation report done by Aaron Prouse and his staff. I'd encourage you to read it. It has many factors and different graphs in there that you will notice actually how big the solid waste collection and disposal departments are part of the city, and how big that enterprise fund is. We did not have it in a PowerPoint to present it tonight, but I encourage you to read it, and if you have any comments, please contact myself or Mr. Prouse.
Okay, are there any comments or questions regarding the report? Mr. Kessel.
President Johnson, I just want to outline, if you haven't had the opportunity to review it, that there's been significant growth in this area, as you can imagine, with the amount of housing and dwelling units that have been added to our community. This department has, of course, borne the brunt of the collection and the disposal of that solid waste. We continue to take on collection from multiple communities, over 20 communities in and around Southwest North Dakota. So we serve as a regional player in that regard, and those communities are growing as well, for the most part, each and every one of them. So this staff has really been taxed to a great degree, and the the skill-based pay that the Commission has provided to these staff in particular has been extremely helpful in retaining and obtaining staff in that department. So I just wanted to mention how much they've grown and how beneficial skill-based pay has been to getting staff for these folks, because they are CDL drivers. They are, for the most part, the collections employees are CDL drivers and could easily make much more money in other positions in our community, but choose to stay here because of other reasons.
Yeah, I think, you look at the disposal fees, in 2008, they were just over $550,000, and I realize we've had some rate increases, but in 2012, they were nearly $1.4 million, so that's a lot of growth, even with some rate increases, and there's several categories here, a list of what we dispose of and the tonnage, and as you look through these numbers, you see increases in virtually everything, significant increases, and it's not really fair to get too detailed with the questions for Mr. Zaroff, because I think this is you've completed 3 weeks.
That's correct.
Now, once you complete 4 weeks, we'll ask you all kinds of questions.
Well, I did want to say that I believe Mr. Prouse and his staff did an excellent job with this. I think these kind of reports that are sent to the State Department of Health are viewed as great for Dickinson, because I think they take this report to other cities in North Dakota and suggest that they do the same kind of reporting. So I do believe it is a great document they did.
And President Johnson, we've not allowed Mr. Zaroff to get away with using his brevity on staff with getting out of answers, so feel free to ask him anything you want.
Yeah. Well, it would be curious, just, after 3 weeks on the job, if you have any just general observations about what you're finding here in Dickinson, specifically as it relates to Public Works. If there's any general comments you'd care to make, we'd certainly hear them.
I guess not a lot of general or specific comments. I guess a lot of generalities would be I think the staff in each division, I will call it division, water, wastewater, streets, and solid waste, There's a lot of good employees there. I think there's a lot of need for some more training in specific areas that we need to look at. I think there's a big separation in some cases between those staff and administration, but hopefully I can help solve some of those issues. And one of the problems too with this amount of growth is to look at maybe some of those areas of safety and training. When you look at that and maybe contemplate doing some of those things, it's difficult because we're busy so much. There's so much going on that we're just trying to keep track of where maybe the new line is, where maybe the new street is, and I think it's real difficult with all this going on to get a handle on operations. So I think hopefully I can help with that.
Do you have a sense of, like, for solid waste, how many new accounts they're adding each week or maybe each month?
I don't. One of the I was out there again last week in how they who calls in and when they get a request for accounts. I'm going to have some division meetings tomorrow and try to get some questions answered on the subdivisions when they come in for not necessarily accounts for solid waste, but also for water and streets. When is it decided that it is a city street, a city water main, things like that? I'm not sure how many counts come in every day, but you can imagine with building permits, it all coincides.
Right. I think one of the things the commission would certainly welcome in the future is hearing kind of regular reports from Public Works on things like that, the account statistics. We have a major project, of course, going with the wastewater treatment plant. We haven't had an update in quite a while, so if you could do it next meeting or maybe 2 meetings from now, bring in some photographs of the construction site and just in general tell us how they're doing out there and whether or not they're on schedule, behind schedule, ahead of schedule, that kind of
President Johnson Commission, I would be glad to do that. I've been at the last 2 progress report meetings out there. I plan to get out there and look at what's going on with that water reclamation facility. I think it's a great project, and I'm real interested, and I'd be glad to give you an update.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, it's $48 million project. We should probably hear from time to time how we're doing on that. So,
I agree.
Yeah. Other comments here?
I really like this report. Thank you. Who does all the sorting out there?
President Johnson, Commissioner Dukart, I wish I did the report, but I think Mr. Prowse's administrative assistant did most of the work.
Other
Pretty
comments?
interesting.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's nice to have this breakdown and the cost. I mean, like $16,000 and over 16 just to grind tires. That's a lot of money that we're spending. Just wondering, hopefully we're taking that in as well.
Well, you mentioned the enterprise funds in your comments. I mean, we have really 3 pretty major businesses that we're running outside of our general fund, and one is the landfill, the solid waste. That's becoming a pretty big business. Water distribution and wastewater treatment collection is a big business, and I think it's going to get to be even bigger. And then if you the street fund, which we don't often talk about, but that's going to be it already is, but will become an even bigger business. And I think we're going to have to dive into really maybe more detailed reporting and planning on those funds. Right now they just tend to be kind of a line item in the overall budget, but they're pretty significant each by themselves right now, so, and growing.
President Johnson and Commission, I agree, and I've been spending a lot of the last 3 weeks reading a lot of reports with those three enterprise funds of what past reports and future projects that are anticipated. And I agree, they are all large funds.
Well, the wastewater, or the water wastewater fund, let's just call it the water fund in general. I mean, we're already running a major capital expenditure project through there, and Commissioner Jackson knows better than I, but what we're going to do with water distribution and wastewater pipes and water tanks and all that, there's going to be big dollars that flow through that fund. So, and maybe big debt. So,
Oh, Aaron, thank you. This is a really good report.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to tab 9. That's the commission report, and the first item we have there is on Green Meadow Court. And Mr. Kessel, I'm not sure who is introducing that item. Are you doing that?
I have to apologize, President Johnson. I'm not familiar with this item, and maybe I can take this opportunity to say thank you to Tina Johnson for completing the memo this week. I do appreciate her in my absence doing that, but I have to admit my naivete with regard to this specific item, and I'm not sure if there's a member of the community here that's ready to represent this to the commission.
If I understood the reading of this is really for our information only. It's not any action that we take. Am I correct on that?
I think that's right.
I think that's right, Mr. Jackson, that the owner or management company for Green Meadow Court is just informing us of some action that they're taking. Mrs. Johnson, do you know? Maybe you want to come up and rescue the mayor and Mr. Kessel here.
President Johnson, Commissioners, I believe that is the case. They were just giving us the information that they will be refinancing, and it could change low-income housing to something that's not low income.
So it could go from low-income housing to market-based housing. That's not for certain, but because they are refinancing and would apparently pay off a loan that required them to be low-income housing, they would have the option of going to market-based.
Right, and just letting us know that that would reduce our number of low-income housing available.
Right. Okay. So, don't run away, in case there's any questions here.
Well, that would just start August 15th, right?
I believe so.
What it says in his letter here. I happen to know this gentleman, because if you have any questions, you can call him.
Okay, any questions or comments here for Mrs. Johnson? All right, thank you. Okay, and then under under the commission reports, we added the city attorney contract. At our last meeting, you gave me the authority to, I guess both Mr. Kessel and I, the authority to negotiate an employment contract for your consideration with Mr. Colling to become our full-time city attorney. And you have before you that contract. I think the major item in it is his salary, and that is $94,015 per year. The other thing is, I think he would officially start on the 11th of March with the city, and this contract is essentially the same contract that we have with the city administrator. Mr. Kessel, is there anything you would add to this?
Yeah, I think if Attorney Colling was involved in the negotiations of my contract, if you'd have known that he was essentially negotiating his own later, it might look a little different than it does today. But having said that, no, it's essentially the same contract that I have, and I would certainly endorse executing that contract.
You probably should tighten your contract up. So, in here, I think it spells out his vacation days too. Also, I'm assuming since we passed the ordinance, had second reading of the vacation ordinance, that Mr. Kessel would come to an agreement for kind of a vacation allowance there with Mr. Colling if it's different from what is stated in here now. I think.
President Johnson, there was, I guess, there might be one thing to add under services. There's two items I think called out specifically, and that is HR and government affairs. Obviously, the legal, it isn't, I don't believe stated specifically, but it's a pretty obvious item, and I'm not sure if you want that stated specifically in there or not. But I think the two services called out are government affairs and HR.
Mr. President, I had wondered about making sure we have understanding between the civil work and the criminal work, and you guys probably do, but I wonder if you don't need to talk about that here.
I can take a stab at that, Commissioner Jackson. We still do have a contract with Ebeltoft-Sickler to do our criminal work. That contract doesn't end until 2014, and so that will remain in existence. Although Mr. Colling may be involved in that to a certain degree, it will not bar us from ending that portion of the contract with Ebeltoft-Sickler. And I'm sure the Commission recognizes as well that hiring an individual doesn't mean that we may not have to hire legal services from other providers as the specialties create themselves. Matt is an intelligent man who's got a lot of experience, but not necessarily in everything. So we may have to incur legal fees to hire specific practice as they arise.
The other question I have, and I think the agreement is fine and the terms are fine. What are we thinking about staff, about administrative help?
I'm glad you asked that question as well. We do have authorized in the 2013 budget a half-time HR assistant. That is something we'd like to see bumped to full-time with the addition of Mr. Colling. We've not made that a formal request yet, but certainly the budget in 2013 that you've approved already was to provide that HR assistance, and we'll have an additional need for legal assistance as well. Mr. Colling and I have talked about that. It does not require a specific legal training, and that anybody who would be hired for an HR assistant could be taught the needs of the legal side. And I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Colling, but I believe that summarized our conversation.
Okay. Thanks.
So shortly we'll probably bring to you a request to make that a full-time position.
Any other comments? If not, I would, for your consideration, I would ask that the employment contract that there be a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Dukart?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Are there any other comments by commission members? I would just, remind the commission and remind the staff that Mrs. Johnson, if I'm wrong here, correct me, but that at our next meeting, we would be getting our financial report that would be for the first 2 months of the year. So it'll be interesting to see now how close to budget we are on our revenues and our expenses through the first 2 months, and see if, again, how close our assumptions are. And that'll have a bearing, too, on requests like you just mentioned, or possible requests if you go, for, some additional staffing. Of course, we're going to need to see that our revenues are as projected or exceeding projections. So we'll be looking for comments from Mrs. Johnson if she sees anything in the first 2 months that are significantly different from what our assumptions were. And again, I remind people, many of these assumptions really were made back in August and September, and as Mr. Jackson and Mr. Oldmans have both said in previous comments, there are a lot of changes happening in our city, and a lot can change from even August to March here. So, okay. Next is item 10. If there's anyone from the public that would like to address the commission, you can do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public, so then we come to our favorite part. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.